Hello and welcome to Video Revealed. I'm Colin Smith. These are core selection tips in Adobe Photoshop. All right, it doesn't matter how smart Photoshop gets, and I'm using an update that just came out yesterday. Even though it has a few more updates, there are still times when the automated processes inside Photoshop need a helping human hand. And the thing is, these tips are not expecting you to be a master painter. They're just for you to understand some core principles about selections. It's all about selections. Nothing has changed since the beginning of Photoshop. I'm going to link at the end and I'll put it in the description. I used to be a retoucher 30 years ago, and the selection tools and tips that I learned back then and figured out myself because there was no YouTube, I use those every day in Photoshop, and that's what I'm going to teach you. Let's talk about making selections and refining them. And the keyboard shortcuts that I'm going to be giving you are really essential. You don't have to use them, but I think that they make things a lot faster. So let's have a quick look at this example here. I'm using this one as a simple example to talk about painting masks. So I've got a white background, bright nails, so definitely this is going to fail in the automated process. But Adobe gives you this new floating bar, and if they didn't give you this bar, you grab this tool here, the quick selection tool, and the same choices come up there. So you select the subject, and if you don't have a subject, it's going to fail. And then the next button over here is turn that into a mask. And you'll see in my layers over here, which I like to have my layers stuck out on the side, so I lock them over here. I'll click on this button here and it will make a mask. Now let's just look at the mask. If you hold down the Alt key on Windows, Option on Mac, and click on the mask, you can see the mask. Whatever is white is showing, whatever is black is hidden. If you click back on the image, you'll see the image. So if I zoom in on this nail, you'll see we're missing that nail. And if we look at the mask, you'll see that the mask that section is black and it needs to be white. Well, the cool thing about this is you can select the mask, but you can look at the image. So I want to paint this back in. So here's my first keyboard shortcut. B for brush, D for default, X to flip colors, and 0, not O. B gets the brush. D defaults the color, puts black and white in the foreground background color. X flips it so you now have black in the foreground. 0 means the opacity is at 100% because almost all masking is done with a solid brush. So BDX0, I'm holding down Alt on Windows, Option on Mac, and right-clicking left and right to change the size, up and down to change the hardness. So I want this fairly hard, but medium. So in this example, I don't want to paint with black because it's going to take things away. So I'll hit the X key and flip back. Now I can just click in here and paint. And I'm painting this in here. So it's no different than painting like this, except I'm looking at the results while I'm painting. It's a little bit chunky, but you get the idea. And I love this, being able to tap the X key. And if you look over here, you'll see my colors flip back and forth. So if I want to get rid of that little notch in there because the automated process didn't work, instead of trying to get a small brush and paint in there, I'll get a smaller brush, make sure I'm painting black, and I'll paint the white away, but it also paints the finger away. But if I hit the X key and flip back, then I can paint the finger away. That way I get a sharp edge without having to change brushes. And all I'm doing is painting either solid white and solid black, but with a slightly feathered edge based on how much feathering is in that image. If it's a very blurry image, then I have to paint with a blurry brush, but you get the idea. If I paint with a big blurry brush, making sure I still have the mask selected and I'm painting with black, then I can blur that away. And then if I flip it, I can bring that back. So those are critical steps: painting in, painting out, painting in, painting out. All right, so let me throw that away. I don't want that. We're going to go to the File menu, the Edit menu, and choose the sky replacement. This is a automated process in Photoshop that's going to replace the sky, and it's going to automatically do some selections. I don't think this selection's very good because I want to show you why. I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on this sky and zoom into this area here. Well, if this is gray, then it's showing. But in the original image, it's solid. There's no see-through trees there. What is this silly automated thing doing? So I don't like that selection. To me, I would never do that. I want a solid selection all the way along this. Look at. This is going to be transparent to the background, which makes no sense. So I'm going to steal the sky by dragging it. First of all, let me double click on the background and to call that the foreground. And then I'll drag the sky below it. And then I'll take my whole sky replacement and delete it. Okay, I'm going to make my own selection at this point. So for this, you can't use subject select because there's no subject. But you can use this tool, which I love. This is the quick selection tool. And you can just do these big drags right over top. Just be careful when you get to the edge that you're not selecting the sky. All right, so we've got a selection all the way to the edge, and then I'll click this button to make a mask. Okay, I've got a mask in there. Oh, and my sky still has that mask from before. I don't want this mask, so I'll right click on it and delete it. So now I've got 100% sky, I've got 100% edge, but the edge is too sharp. That's the only thing with that quick selection tool. Now that I could have gone into the masking part of the tools and messed around with feather and extract or expand and contract and blur. I could have done that, but I want to show you the power of you doing stuff with the tools in the mask beyond that. Because maybe what if that didn't work? And especially in the next section, that only works on the whole selection. Sometimes you want to change a part of a selection. So follow me here. Let's look at my foreground mask, and you'll see it's kind of hard. So I'm going to blur that, and I'll do that by selecting the mask. This is absolutely critical. This is a way you can save a mask. Oh, the mask is good, but it's too hard. Blur, baby. I'll select it. Make sure the mask is selected. Go to Filter, Blur, good old Gaussian blur. And then I'll move this little selection over the edge to see it. So 3 pixels seems good. I'll click OK. And now I've got an obvious problem. I have a halo. Why did that occur? Well, blurring takes the edge and expands the selection of the edge. So the selection of this is now blurring into, if I turn the mask off, if you hold the Shift key down and click on the mask, you'll turn it down. So now the selection is starting to get some of the sky in there. No problem. This is the critical step I want to show you. I'm going to make a selection, invert the selection, and fill the selection. And if you know these 3 steps and you look at a halo like this in your head, I can fix this, no problem. And you're fixing it with mathematics, with science, not with art. You just fix this, baby. Okay, so how do we fix that? Well, the first thing to do is to make a selection. And you can turn a mask into a selection by holding the Control key or Command on the Mac and click on the mask. And you can see I've got a selection now. Okay, I want the selection to change. I want this to contract because right now the mask is selecting the foreground. The cool thing about these tools now is this floating toolbar actually gives you the tools that you would have to go to the select menu, modify, and contract. But I can go to this one and contract selection. It's going to give me a choice. So what does it mean by contract? Make smaller. Make smaller? Yes. Remember my foreground, the edge of the mountains are going too far. So I'm going to contract the selection a little bit by 1 pixel. And you won't see a change because a selection is just a selection. You have to use that selection to paint in. So I don't want to paint the white. So if I click Option, Alt, click on here, I don't want to paint the white. I want to paint the black from here down. And although the selection looks like it's going to be another hard edge, selections can't show you a feather amount. They can only show you an average of where they are. So again, another thing this new bar gives you is access to this command, invert selection. So what do I want to do? I want to take the black and fill it to where the selection is. So I now inverted the selection, and you can use the keyboard shortcuts, fill, and that will bring that up. But I like to use Alt or Control to fill with foreground, fill with background. Now I want to do this with the image showing. So I've got the mask selected, and I've got my selection showing. I'm going to hide that. Control H, Command H. It's still there. I just want to show you how cool this is. Watch this. Control Backspace on Windows, Command Delete on the Mac. Boom. Look at that. I'll undo that and redo that. Halo, no halo. Deselect. If I didn't have to stop and explain that to you, I would have made a selection, made a selection, contracted the selection, inverted the selection, and filled the selection. You know what? You could even make that into a Photoshop action if you do this all the time, and the action you record, and from now on, you just push a button. And it doesn't matter the size, resolution, or shape of that selection. So this that I just showed you is like from Photoshop 2.5, before there were layers. But when we only had one undo, and we had to make everything with selections and alpha channels. This is the kind of thing that I think if you have a problematic graphic, you can fix it. Now, this was a global fill. I filled the whole selection. What happens if you have a halo only in one part? Now let's look at that. For this, we're going to choose Select Subject. And we're going to mask this. But what I want to show you is, let's bring in a background, place embedded, and this one. I'll hold the Option or Alt key and resize that, drop that into the background. Now, it makes no sense that it's so clear. It has to be blurred. So for that, I'll go back to Filter. This time I'll go to Blur Gallery, Field Blur, which is more like a lens blur. And I'll turn that up and click OK. All right. So what happens, I've got a halo here, but I also have a halo there. And if we turn the mask off, we can actually see his ear is blurry because of the depth of field. So how do we do that? Well, the cool thing about this is it's the same principle. Select the mask again, hold Control on Windows, Command on Mac. I'll contract this selection again, 1 pixel. I'll invert the selection, Make sure I've got the mask selected. I'm going to hide the mask and hit my magic keys, B, D, X, 0. Now, when I come in here and paint, I'm not going to paint past that selection. So you see I'm painting just that part out. And do you know how hard it would be to paint that accurate by hand without a mask? It would be nearly impossible. So now I'm going to, let me clean that up. I hit Control D, Command D to deselect, so I don't have a selection. Now I'm going to fly by the seat of my pants. I've got a really blurry brush. And remember, I've got white here. So if I paint, whoops, flip my colors. If I paint white, remember, his ear is blurry. So if I go back to the mask, make sure I'm painting white and paint a little bit in here, flip the color, take it back a little bit. I think I've got too much of a blur on there. So I've got a harder edge up there and a slightly blurry edge down there. Now this one did require me painting with mask freehand, but the idea is you have so much control over the mask. And if you're worried about this, duplicate the layer, select the whole layer in the mask, Control J, hide this one, and then start going to work on another one, just in case you make a mess of that mask. You can also save these masks too. So there's the mask in my channels. I can drag that down there and save that and name it. We used to work with selections exclusively back in the day. All right, one last selection tip, and that's using an image to make a selection of itself. Let me show you that. All right, again, we'll try Adobe's Select Subject. And we'll make a mask, and yikes, that does not look good at all. So let's undo that. Instead, we're fortunate enough to have enough contrast between his hair and the background. So if we go to our channels and look at the red channel, green channel, blue channel, I think the blue channel is darker. We want to find the most contrast between this hair and that. So I'll duplicate this, and now this blue copy is going to be a mask. Control L or Command L on the Mac, it brings up my levels. And if you notice here, this is white. So if I start making white whiter, not too white, because it's going to start taking away the edges. The black isn't solid black yet, so I'll start dragging that up. I don't want to plug that up, so I'm going to be careful. And then I can move the middle one too and darken that up. Click OK. And now get my brush. I'm going to make a fairly hard brush here. Make sure I'm painting black at 100%. And I'm going to change this from a photograph to a mask. Now, if the rest of the image wasn't contrasted, wasn't enough high contrast, I could save the selection of the hair and load that separately. And by the way, I'm just holding the space bar down to zoom those areas. Now, I'm not going to take a lot of time on this because I think you get the idea of making selections. So you're basically filling in this area, and I could have done that with a marquee. And you're turning this all into your own mask, but we're basing it on the image. All right. So remember, what we want selected is white. Right now, it's the opposite. So when we have a mask selected, Control-I on Windows, Command-I on the Mac will give us this selection. Now, when I do that, you can see that the white that was there, when I convert it into black, isn't really that black. So I'm going to try carefully to paint these areas. All right. So if you hold the Control key, just like selecting a mask in the layers, Control on Windows, Command on Mac, and click on the mask, the channel, it loads it. Now when I go to RGB to get back my image, and this handy little tool is create a mask. If you don't have that, then the same tool is at the bottom down there. Click, we add a mask. Let's add a background. Just like before, resize that, drop that to the back, and let's go back to our blur gallery is still there, so I should be able to use that effect. Click OK. And now we've got a much more natural selection. There is it off. So I lost a little bit, but I think my selection looked way better than the automatic selection that Photoshop made. So yes, Photoshop is getting more incredible tools all the time. That's not where this is useful. This is useful when something like that doesn't work and you need to tweak it. And you not only need to tweak it, but you need to tweak it in one area, like just around that the young boy's head, and not everything like the replace the sky example. Sometimes fill with black is going to work. Sometimes you're painting while you have a selection. That's actually called a frisket. So back in the day, airbrush artists would make physical masks. They would cut a physical mask and put it onto a photograph. So when they're painting, it doesn't go onto the mask, and then they would carefully remove the mask. This is the same principle. That's how old this technique is. It's decades old, but incredibly useful. If you have this in your bag of tricks, doesn't matter if you're doing images or video or graphics or logos or any kind of design, you're going to run into a problem sometime where an edge is not right. You need to blur it. You need to fix it. You need to paint it. Now you have all the amazing techniques that I took decades to use and learn as a retoucher. Hey, if you're new to Video Revealed and you found this informative, take a moment and subscribe. You've got to watch my the link that I'll have in the description about my life in Photoshop. If you want to support us more, you can do that on VideoRevealed.com/shop. Donate once or monthly. We love all of our wonderful donors. Thank you so much. Till next time, I'm Colin Smith, and it's my job to not lose the ideas that I had years ago that I use every day, that maybe new users could use these even with the smartness of AI. Sometimes a human can still be smarter.